everyone, I'm Mike O'Neill and welcome to FlyBoyz. Well, I'm going to give you a brief video update here on what has become my on-again, off-again Martin B-10 bomber build. If you remember from my last post and video that I did on the bomber, I was working through some issues with the wing construction. And I basically wanted to update you on one of the primary issues I talked about in that last video. And it has to do with the lead-out wires and how they go through the wing ribs and exit the wing panel. I would refer you to my last video to get an update on what the specific issue was. And what I'm going to do here is talk about what I've done to resolve that issue and just give you an overall update on the wing itself, which hasn't made a lot of progress, but there has been progress nonetheless. So with that, I'm going to go over to the building bench and describe what the issue was briefly, and then give an update as to what I've done to resolve the issue. All right, we're back over here at the workbench, and as you can see from the last video, we now have the fuel tanks installed. We've got some fuel lines coming out of them. These are the fill lines, and these are the feed lines to the engines. All these will be cut to proper length once the engines are installed and the wing is installed. So the fuel lines are all set. The fuel tanks are all set. Everything went very good with all of them. You can also see we've got the bell crank assembly in place, but I'll come back to talking about that in just a moment. Over here, the outer wing panel, nothing has changed on that since the last video. That is exactly the same and untouched. All the issues had to do, and all the changes have to do with the inner wing panel. And by a brief discussion here, just to update those that may not have seen the last video on this, we had an issue with the lead-out wire, what I'll call the leading edge lead-out wire, was coming out from the bell crank, and then when it reached the point of this rib in here at the dihedral brake, it was angling off at a bad angle, and you cannot have your lead-out wire with an angle in it. It has to be a straight shot all the way through the wing. So to correct that, what I did was I made some new holes and got the line to go straight through the wing. However, that caused it to exit out the leading edge of the wing right where this spot is right here. And the line was straight and everything looked like it would work good, but I really was not happy with it going out the leading edge like that. That just bothered me a whole lot. Plus, as I've said in previous videos, I am not an engineer. And that really came home to roost after the last video when I realized that the issue that I was having was not with the holes in the outer wing panel, but the issue really was with the holes in the inner wing panel. These holes, the original holes in the outer wing panel, were all correct, it turns out, but the ones that were messed up were the ones on the inner wing panel. So what I did was I made new holes through the ribs on the inner wing panel so that they would line up with the original holes on the outer wing panel. And that solved the problem as far as the lead-out wire going through in a straight line and also exiting out where it was shown on the plans to exit the wing and not exiting through the leading edge as I had it there. So that really corrected that whole problem and made everything a lot more palatable in my mind. Also, what I did, if you remember from the last video, I had some tubes going through the wing for the lead-out wire. I've continued with the tubes, and I'm happy with that, but I changed out from the big fat tubes that I had before to these thinner, lighter tubes to guide the lead-out wires through the wing. And I explained my purposes for that tube in that last video, and I'm very happy with these tubes that I'm using here. The other thing that I did was the tubes that I'm using are a smaller diameter, so they were a little floppy in the holes. So what I did was I added some gussets to each of the ribs where the tube goes through the rib, and that very much solidified these tubes. I've got them glued down in to those gussets, and everything is rock solid in there. Those tubes aren't going to move or go anywhere. And then up here at the end of the wing, near the wingtip, where the tubes and the wires exit the underside of the wing, I put in some reinforced, I got some balsa reinforcements and epoxy, just making that exit point a lot more solid, because that will have a lot of tension and force on it with those wires once the plane is in flight. So let me show you just real quick what I did underneath the wing. And okay, we're now looking at the bottom side of that inner wing panel, and you can see where those tubes exit the wing. This is the bottom sheeting of the wing. The tubes exit the wing, and the lines are in the tube, and this is a nice, smooth, secure transition out of the wing here, and these are epoxied in, so this is going to be very, very firm as far as any tension that the lines put on these entry points. The other thing that I did was right here, you can see where the hole was originally through the leading edge. I've put a balsa dowel in there and filled up that hole. Right now it looks a mess because it's got the glue all over the place and hasn't been trimmed and sanded up, but this will be invisible once the plane is all complete. So I have plugged that hole that I made, and I've got the lead out wires coming out of the wing, and everything looks pretty good with all that. So here I am again, back showing the top of the wing. So the issue's been resolved. I feel really good now about the position of this front lead out line and how it exits out the wing tip instead of the leading edge. So I'm considering that this whole issue has been resolved. One thing I don't like is I like my building of any model to be nice and, I'll call it, pretty. And this wing panel on the inside is anything but pretty at this point, with all the hacking and slashing and carving and cutting that I've had to do for these issues that I've talked about. I've ended up with a wing panel that visually on the inside structurally is not real pretty, but nobody's going to see it because it's all going to be sheeted over, so it's not really ultimately a problem. And believe it or not, the weight of this wing is actually not going up much at all, because I had so many holes in the wing ribs that putting those gussets on did not really add any appreciable weight to that wing tip. So that brings us back over here to the bell crank assembly, and this is pretty standard. I've got this all installed. There's a plywood platform here that the bell crank goes on, and this again is the first time I've used a swivel ball link type of arrangement for hooking up the push rod. I've always used the traditional Z wire that just, you make a Z at the end and insert it into the bell crank. This time though, I've gone with the swivel, and that's worked out really good. Over here is the carbon. Here is the carbon push rod that will get inserted, and that will go into the end of the link right here. When the time is ready, that'll get epoxied in there, and that'll go back to the elevator. So that's my push rod installation ultimately. As you can see, I'll do some movement here. The push rod does work nice and easily. There's absolutely no binding on that push rod or the wires going through the wing and exiting the wing. So I'm real pleased with the performance of this bell crank assembly. So that takes me on to the next thing I'll be doing, which is sheeting this wing, the top of the wing. And you can see some of the sheeting here in the background, and we've talked about what I'll be using for sheeting the next time. In the last video, we talked about what I'll be using for sheeting. So I'm going to sheet this wing, and just the top. I'm going to leave the center section open for now, because next Saturday, this is being filmed early in the week, at the end of March. And on Saturday, April 2nd, I believe it is, Syracuse, New York is hosting their first ever Maker Fair. And I've become a fan of the Maker movement, so I'm attending the Maker Fair as an exhibitor, and I'll be exhibiting this wing along with some other control line stuff I've got in the process as part of the Maker Fair. So I'm going to leave this center section of the wing unsheeted for the moment because I want any people that are interested in this wing to be able to see what the inner guts of this thing looks like. After the Maker Fair, I'll come back and I'll sheet over this center section, and then the wing will be done at that point, and I can move on to the fuselage. One other thing that I hope to do before the Maker Fair this next weekend is do a lot of carving and sanding. As I talked about last time, these wingtips are really just blocks, and there's a lot of rough sanding that needs to be done on the wing skins, and the same over here with this wingtip. This is very blocky. I need to sand this so it actually looks like a wingtip, and then get the whole wing sanded and shaped so that it looks a lot better for the exhibit next weekend of this. Okay, here we are. It's now 2 days later, and I just wanted to do one last brief update before I finished out this video. Over the last 2 days, I've been able to sheet the outer wing panel that was unsheeted before, and I've done all the rough sanding. I still have a whole lot of fine sanding to do, but I got the rough sanding done. So for instance, this wing tip has been roughly sanded to shape. You'll notice in here I've got some filler where it needed to smooth out the transition from the wing tip to the wing sheeting. For those that you may be interested in that, I found that using lightweight spackling compound works great for me. It sands very easily, it fills great, and it does not add any appreciable weight once it's all dried and sanded. So you might see that in a couple spots on the wing. The other thing I did was the transition on the leading edge where these weren't meeting up really good before. I got that all sanded and touched up, the same with the trailing edge. And the same thing over here. I got this trailing edge matched up now, and I got this leading edge so it blends in really well. And again, on this outer wingtip, I did get the rough sanding done out here. This wingtip now actually looks like a wingtip. Got a little spackling compound in here to make that transition from the sheeting to the wingtip nice and smooth. And that's basically where we are. I'm going to continue over the next couple days doing a lot more fine sanding on this before I move on to the fuselage. But at this point, also, as I said the other day, I have to finish doing the sheeting in the center section, but I'm leaving this open for the Maker Fair, as I said. So after the Maker Fair, I'll come back, I'll sheet this, sand it, and then we will be moving on to the fuselage. So that's it for this update for now. The wing, I think, is good enough that I can bring it to the Maker Fair, and people will recognize it as a wing as such. And in the meantime, I'm going to take this video and put it out on FlyBoyz and do the next update on the B-10 bomber build. So until next time, take care. Bye.